Marc Casado has probably been Barcelona's most underrated player this season. After the injury of Marc Bernal, Hansi Flick needed someone else to become Barcelona's defensive midfielder, and Marc Casado was the one to take that role upon him. In the following months, he would go on to become a cornerstone player in Hansi Flick's Barcelona, with outstanding performances game in, game out. Marc Casado went from being a bench player with barely any minutes under Gavi to one of Barcelona's protagonists within the space of a few months. He gave Barcelona the control over the midfield that they have so often lacked in recent years. He had the defensive awareness that no other midfielder at Barca had, and he reminded people of Sergio Busquets himself. But in recent months, Frenkie de Jong has started getting more and more prominence in the team, leading to Marc Casado losing his starting lineup spot. Nevertheless though, it did still seem as if he was going to play a crucial role in the months of April and May, definitely considering the busy match schedule that Barcelona are going to have. However, then, on the 16th of March in the game against Atletico Madrid, Marc Casado got out injured. A partial ligament tear in his right knee will keep Casado out for the coming 2 months, meaning that he will essentially miss the rest of the season. On top of that, this injury could have a major impact on his overall future at Barcelona. The future might suddenly not be that bright anymore for Marc Casado. So in this video, we're going to talk about how exactly this injury could affect his future at the club, and also whether he can ever really have that same prominence again that he had a few months ago. So let's just get right to it. But first of all, before we start talking about the injury, we need to address Marc Casado's competition with Frenkie de Jong. Because regardless of the injury, it's just a blatant fact that Casado has already slowly been disappearing out of the team in the last 2 months. Hansi Flick has clearly chosen Frenkie de Jong as his main midfielder to partner up with Pedri. At the start of the season, Frenkie just wasn't available yet, and then it took a while before he got into a proper match rhythm again. So now, even without the injury, we don't really know whether Marc Casado would have gotten that many minutes in the coming months. Even recently against Atletico Madrid, he originally wasn't going to play. He only replaced Frenkie de Jong in the starting lineup because of some minor discomforts that Frenkie had. That is why we need to picture how important Marc Casado would have been in the first place if it wasn't for that injury. Frenkie de Jong would have definitely started in most games, and it's likely that Hansi Flick would have just rotated him with Marc Casado every now and then. That's the role that Casado is realistically going to have in the coming months. But now you might be thinking, well, maybe Frenkie de Jong gets out injured again too, or maybe he experiences a drop in form. In that case, we would have needed a good Marc Casado instead of him to save Barcelona, right? But if we're being real, Frenkie de Jong just isn't losing his place anytime soon. He is still a more complete midfielder than Marc Casado is. And that's not to discredit Marc Casado, that's just because Frenkie de Jong is really that good. At Barcelona, being world class doesn't guarantee you a starting spot, just because there might be someone else out there who's even more world class than you. That's the situation that Marc Casado has been dealing with in January and February. That is when Frenkie de Jong actually started finding his groove. And sure, now you might be thinking that Marc Casado brings more defensive solidity and that he is more of a natural single pivot. And that's true. In terms of defensive awareness and defensive positioning, Casado is probably superior to Frenkie de Jong. However, if we're talking about qualities on the ball, then Frenkie de Jong is just incredible. His runs forward with the ball, his vision, his technical brilliance, his versatility, his movements, those are all things that he has that Marc Casado doesn't have in the same way. And some people might say that Frenkie de Jong's way of playing is risky because he roams a lot, which means that you leave a lot of spaces that the opponent can exploit. But if you're one of those people, then just consider Pedri for a moment. Pedri this season is that good, even from a defensive point of view, that he can actually compensate for Frenkie de Jong's roaming playing style. He often recovers balls or recovers spaces so that Frenkie de Jong doesn't get exposed. Plus, the offside trap also works in Frenkie's favor because it means that he doesn't always have to stick to his position. It gives him the license to roam. You could even say that the high press allows Frenkie more freedom as well. That's why overall, if you're making that choice between Marc Casado and Frenkie de Jong, it is understandable why Hansi Flick has chosen Frenkie. He gives you more offensive power, while the defensive risk is made up for through Pedri, the offside trap and the high press. Believe me, Hansi Flick knows what he's doing. But this video is not about Frenkie de Jong, it is about Marc Casado. And in reality, we will barely see him play in the coming 2 months because of that injury. Look, even without the injury, Casado would have probably remained second fiddle to Frenkie de Jong, but he still would have had a decent amount of game time. Now, however, someone else will have to step up as Frenkie de Jong's replacement when necessary. And that is where it gets scary for Marc Casado. Because realistically, he's not having any important minutes anymore this season. He might be back in time for the last game in La Liga or a possible Champions League final, but in that case I would strongly doubt whether he would still get picked above any player that has good match rhythm. So there's no way around it. Casado is basically out for the season, and Barcelona need another Frenkie de Jong backup now. Eric Garcia is of course a possibility, and defensively he is a great midfielder. But come on, do you really think that Hansi Flick is only going to consider Eric Garcia as his main Frenkie de Jong backup? There is another player though who also has the potential to play as that pivot next to Pedri, and you all know who I'm talking about now. Gavi. Gavi is, just like Marc Casado, a player who's recently lost his prominence in the team. Hansi Flick has mainly played him in attacking midfield, which makes sense. He was great under Gavi 2 years ago in that attacking role from the left, and he's got the qualities to play there. Great link-up play, close ball control, he can recover balls well, and his passing, shooting and the runs he makes are really underrated. However, in a team with Dani Olmo and Fermin Lopez, that attacking midfield spot is crowded. And no matter how good Gavi is in that role, Dani Olmo is just too perfect not to pick as your number 1 there. That means that Gavi is still available for other roles as well, and we know that he probably has the potential to play in that defensive pivot position. In some games in Gavi last season, before his injury, he played in a double pivot, often together with Gundogan, with Fermin Lopez being the attacking midfielder. And that was actually a well-balanced midfield. Gavi's defensive qualities allowed Gundogan to be creative, and he helped Barcelona control games because the opponent teams usually weren't able to get a hold of the midfield. Gavi was everywhere. Think about that one game in October against Real Madrid that Barcelona lost with 2-1, the famous Bellingham show. Sure, Barcelona lost, but if you actually remember the game, Barcelona were in full control of the midfield, and that was because of a Gavi masterclass. Bellingham and Kroos were quiet for a long time, and it was only because of 2 individual moments of brilliance from Bellingham that Real Madrid won the game. So with Gavi in a double pivot role, you can definitely control games, even against big opponents. Gavi was even considered Barcelona's MVP of the season up to that point. So if Hansi Flick decides to put Gavi next to Pedri behind Dani Olmo, then that could definitely work. Sure, Frenkie de Jong still has more qualities on the ball, even Marc Casado is maybe superior to Gavi in that regard. But Gavi has that infinite grit that could help Barcelona get through difficult games. And he's actually incredibly press resistant, let's not forget about that. So will Gavi become Hansi Flick's first choice midfielder next to Pedri? Well, probably not given Frenkie de Jong's recent form. But can Gavi become a reliable backup for him? Absolutely, and given the busy match schedule, that could mean that he will have a lot of game time. And just imagine Frenkie de Jong gets out injured. In that case, Gavi has the chance of a lifetime to prove himself again. But the bottom line is that for Marc Casado, this is bad news. Gavi could cement himself as a really reliable Frenkie de Jong backup. And when Marc Casado returns from injury, and especially next season, he might have an extra midfielder to compete with in Gavi. However, that's not the worst of it maybe. Because as you probably know, Marc Casado was always going to have an extra midfielder to compete with next season. Marc Bernal. Marc Bernal got out injured last August, and even though his injury might be a long-term one that requires a lengthy recovery, he will still return to first-team football next season. I mean, after what we saw of him in that short period, it would be criminal not to give him that chance. He made it seem as if Sergio Busquets had never left, before Marc Casado did so, and he did it at 17 years of age. If Lamine Yamal and Pau Cubarsí are the new Messi and Gerard Piqué, then Marc Bernal might very well be the new Sergio Busquets. He's part of that same crazy generation. When he returns, it might take a month or two for him to really be at full power again, just like with Frenkie de Jong, but when he's fully fit and available, Hansi Flick will have some tough decisions to make. There could very well be 3 different Frenkie de Jong backups next season, with Gavi, Marc Casado and Marc Bernal. And if Gavi actually proves a point in the coming months, and if Marc Bernal hasn't lost his spark, then that would be bad news for Marc Casado. Sure, he's probably okay staying at Barcelona as a second fiddle, but would he agree on being the 4th in the pecking order? And Frenkie de Jong might be in his late 20s already, but both Gavi and Marc Bernal are actually younger than Marc Casado. This is why Casado's future is uncertain. First, he lost his place to Frenkie de Jong, now he'll be missing out on most of the season, which might give Gavi the opportunity to take over his role, and next season Marc Bernal will be returning as well. So the sad truth is that we don't really know whether Marc Casado can ever have the same prominence again in Barcelona that he had in the first months of the season. But before you're going to go down to the comments to defend Marc Casado, I also want to give him some appreciation for what he has done this season. Without him, Barcelona generally wouldn't have been where they are today. In the months of September, October and even November, Gavi and Frenkie de Jong weren't available or just not in good form yet. And without Marc Casado, we would have maybe seen Eric Garcia as the main defensive pivot. In some games like those legendary ones against Bayern Munich and Real Madrid, Barcelona couldn't have done it without Casado. He was crucial for helping control the midfield, and his creativity often allowed Barcelona to find openings in attack. We also have to praise him for his patience, to be fair, because if you remember, he was actually available all season long last year under Xavi, and after the departure of Busquets, it would have probably helped Xavi a lot to trust Marc Casado. I still don't know why Xavi didn't give him more minutes, especially given the injuries of Frenkie de Jong, Pedri and Gavi. So from Casado's point of view, it would have probably been easy to give up on a dream and just leave Barcelona. But he didn't do that. Marc Casado is one of the most loyal players that Barcelona have. He was Barcelona Athletics captain for years straight. He bleeds Blaugrana. He's the prototype of a La Masia player. That's why I don't actually want to think about him ever leaving Barcelona. He belongs here. He's probably one of my favorite players. He's probably one of your favorite players too. So this video wasn't made at all to criticize him or to be pessimistic. I just made it out of concern for Marc Casado's future in this team. But even though the situation isn't looking all too good, even though there's a lot of competition, let's just hope that Marc Casado will bounce back stronger from this setback and that he still has a bright future at Barcelona. So that was it for today's video. Make sure to leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and feel free to share your own opinion on Marc Casado in the comments down below. And of course, Força Barça, Força Marc Casado, and have a good day.